Welcome to the To Be Honest podcast. Today, we're talking with Jessica Zhang, who is a 24-year-old student in the Bay Area for graduate school pursuing a PhD in biology. Outside of academics, she enjoys fighting and martial arts, hiking outdoors, and finding nice spots to eat and drink coffee. She also happens to struggle with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and generally making sense of this confusing thing called life. Welcome, Jessica, to the podcast.
Hi, thanks.
To get started, I like to ask every guest, to be honest, how are you doing today?
All right, to be honest, I am exhausted right now. Preparing for a huge presentation that, unfortunately, with anxiety, I tend to procrastinate. So now I'm having to deal with the consequences of that. But regardless, I'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you can power through and then, get lots of rest after the presentation. So to start off, I did want to talk about your experience with mental health. And you've expressed to me that you have experienced depression. And so I just kind of wanted to start by asking, when did you first notice you were feeling depressed?
Um, I guess I'm like not sure when I noticed I had a word for depressed, but growing up, I was bullied as a kid a lot. I grew up as a person of color in a predominantly white neighborhood. And I think one of my first memories was as a kid in preschool ish. I was bullied for just having not speaking English as well as the other students and just looking different. So I would guess that was the first time that I really just had my reality shattered, in the sense it was wait, why am I being made fun of? What's wrong with me? Almost why are these people just ganging up on me for being different? And I think at that point, that was when I first started to feel symptoms of depression, because it was it ended up being just tied to my worth, in a sense.
At that point, did you recognize, I think I'm depressed, or did you just kind of know, you were feeling a little different or off?
I don't think I knew that I was depressed, but it's one challenge that I'm working through in present day is remembering a lot of my childhood, which I believe I've learned is a pretty fairly common response for people who have emotionally blocked off parts of their life. So there are times where it's hard for me to remember what I was feeling, especially since I don't think I had a good toolbox for understanding emotions. So I guess it's I don't know. I don't think I recognized there was something like depression going on, but I knew I was unhappy.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And I wanted to bring up, you mentioned that you were bullied. I was curious how that impacted you, or how did that add to how you were feeling at the time?
I think one thing was the bullying kind of just made me feel oh, I'll never fit in. So as a result, I put a lot of time and effort towards trying to fit in. And it's almost like trying to solve this impossible puzzle. It's I'm never gonna look or have the same life experiences as my peers. But it was just kind of running against this unsolvable problem with fitting in. So uh it's it definitely made me feel more like a failure when I couldn't fit in. And now looking back, it's kind of I have I can recognize that of course I wouldn't fit in. There's no way that could have been possible, but I think in my mind that was my best coping mechanism to try. But as a result, the constant inability to fit in only heightened my feelings of inadequacy and like made me feel more depressed. Uh, I'm not sure how much anxiety I felt as a young like a when I was younger per se, but there was definitely like this tendency to want to control things. So I don't think I experienced things like panic attacks, but uh the definitely like the wanting to be able to have more control over myself was a common thread.
Yeah, I feel like that's so common too with it's a natural reaction to things kind of out externally being out of control. You just want to feel like something within your life is in control. So I'm curious, how did you cope with those feelings at the time?
So I wasn't really taught like how to sit with my feelings. Unfortunately, that was just never part of my vocabulary growing up. And like in my family, like we didn't talk about emotions too much. Like for example, if I was like crying in public, I would just get yelled at almost. So I largely turned to food for coping. Um, and like one of the reasons I think was like a mealtime was like when my parents and I would actually like consistently spend time together. But then we would kind of like do this thing where we would rush through like eating as fast as possible to just like go back to work. So there wasn't like a huge amount of quality time. And I think like in retrospect, like my parents were probably also using food as a coping mechanism. And I learned that behavior from them. Um, but like food kind of sort of served this like complicated like self-sabotage cycle for me where it's just like, oh, if like I don't feel good about myself on the inside, I'm gonna like eat so much that like I get overweight. And this was like back like when I was growing up, like the norm of like the beauty standard was like the stick thin, like actually like underweight model, but that was like what people were striving for in a sense, for the most part. So I was like surrounded by that, and it was just kind of like, oh, if I like feel bad on the inside, I'm gonna make myself like look worse on the outside and like continuously like eat beyond like what I want to eat like food that would give me like instant like comfort and gratification in the moment. And then like as I gained more weight, I would be bullied more, which would just kind of reinforce like the cycle of like, oh, I'm going to eat more food to deal with like how unhappy I am and like how I felt like I didn't fit in and then just being different in general.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. I know it's probably not easy to talk about some of these subjects, so I appreciate you being so open about it. I'm curious, when was there a point where you decided like I need to seek help? And how did you go about that?
If I was like left to my own devices, I don't think I would have like sought help really. Like I wouldn't have made an active effort. Unfortunately, like one thing that like came with developing an eating disorder was when I like so at one point I like decided it was like, oh, like my logic was like the best way to fit in is to be skinny. So I'm gonna restrict my food and increase like how much I work out. And like as I lost weight, like I got more compliments. So it kind of was in my mind, it was like, oh, I'm finally doing something like quote unquote right. Finally getting more accepted. So it's like I'm gonna continue seeking this external validation almost. Uh, but in the end, it was like it did go too far, and like uh, my parents like were getting concerned about like how little I was eating, and like to them, I was like looking really like skinny and like gaunt at some point, and they took me to the local hospital where I was like actually hospitalized and diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, and I remember like when this happened to me, I like tried to keep it hidden from my classmates as much as possible. But I think for the most part, like, one of the saddest truths that I've come to accept is, like, no one really noticed, like not many people really noticed that there was, like, something wrong, I think. Um, I think it's, like yeah, it's, like, maybe, like, getting to that point was, like, my the only way I could have, like, sought help with, like, what I the tools I had, like, and resources I had. Instead of saying, like, "I need help, something's wrong," I had to, like, reflect it on my body so someone would notice.
So, sorry, I can't remember if you mentioned that you sought treatment for um, the eating disorder as well as your mental health, or how did that go?
So, I was hospitalized for being, like, very underweight and just being basically, like, on the, like, brink of, like, not surviving, essentially. Uh, so what happened was I spent, like, 2 weeks in the hospital, I think, and that was just purely from, like, a physical standpoint where it's like, "Okay, like, let's stabilize, like, your pulse. Let's get you, like, hydrated. Let's get you, like, nutrition like, let's get you nutrients." But and then, one thing I, like, learned last year was I did skip a lot of, like, the actual mental health component of, like, eating disorder recovery. I learned that, like, typically after like, a year ago, as an adult, I learned that typically people will transition from, like, intensive hospital care to, like, partial hospitalization, which, like, features, like, a lot of group therapy modes, like, you're still, like, having a very structured kind of day, um, and for whatever reason, that I don't really know, I did not, like, go through, like, the typical route there. Um, Typically, like, after being discharged from that, like, the partial hospitalization, then you get set up with, like, a therapist to meet with weekly and a nutritionist or dietitian to, like, manage your eating in recovery. Um, and I remember, like, talking to a therapist twice and hating the experience so much, like, it was almost, like, more detrimental to, like, me that I didn't continue therapy and only continued with the dietitian. Um, so in kind of a sense, it was like, I it's like and I don't assign blame to anyone because we didn't know what was, like, going on, but, um, I know my family, like, once they saw that, like, my physical, like, body was improving, then I was fine. But, like, in the end, the eating disorder was more of a symptom of, like, underlying depression and anxiety. So, for whatever reason, like, I never really, like, tackled that head on, like, at the time.
I did want to talk about mental health within the Asian American community and within the household as well. Because I know you kind of mentioned that if you're out in public and you would cry, you were yelled at for that. So, um, as a teenager, did you feel as though you could talk to your parents at all about mental health?
Not really, like, first of all, we didn't have, like, a way to communicate about that really, like, what are feelings, essentially, beyond, like, the very, like, bare bones, like, happy, sad, angry. Um, and then there was, like, the whole stigma against mental health, like, I know in, like, my culture, people with mental illnesses are just designated as, like, crazy, and it's, like, thrown around as, like, as an insult. And, like, as I've mentioned before, it's just, like, we didn't realize that something like an eating disorder could, first of all, exist, and then secondly, like, that it was more of, like, a sign of, like, depression and anxiety than, like, actually, like, the eating disorder itself was just, like, how it manifested as, like, a uh comorbid thing, I guess.
As you went through your treatment, were they supportive? Like, did you feel like you had a support system within your family?
So this is one of those things where I don't remember a lot about personally, like, from childhood, but I think there was not much discussion around like, my emotions, like, going through, um, recovery. I think my parents did, like, seek outside resources and help and, like, were able to, uh, be understanding of, like, how difficult it was to, like, recover in a sense, but I think there were, like, some parts where it was just like, "Why can't you just eat more?" Almost. But overall, they were very supportive.
I'm curious what you, this is kind of a big question, but what do you think can be done to address the cultural barriers and stigmas that exist in the Asian American community in regards to mental health?
So, I am now seeing an Asian American therapist, and, like, personally for me, that's been really helpful since they, like, understand more of, like, the cultural baggage and barriers that, like, come with our upbringing. Um, I think, like, in general, uh, the whole, like, model minority, like, stereotype is, like, very harmful as well, so, like, an understanding that that is, like, harmful as opposed to, like, something to strive for, and, like, that is, like, one of those things where it's, like, for the sake of, like, appearing protecting our image, like, we, like, have to look good all the time, and I think it's, like, one thing to unpack, it's like, okay, like, can't be perfect, can't be perfect. I think, like, just overall, it's like we need more people with, like, an understanding of this, like, context, as well as, like, from the historical perspective, it's like why, like, lots of, like, Asian cultures adopted, like, very intense coping mechanisms to deal with very intense trauma. Um, I think that understanding will help.
If someone listening lives in a household where mental health is not openly talked about, or maybe it's not an accepted topic, do you have any advice for what they could do to start the conversation and or seek help?
I found, like, a lot of support in online communities. For example, like, there are Facebook groups, like, for, like, young Asian American adults to discuss mental health issues, and I, like, think it's been very helpful to have, like, group members that can, like, relate to, like, these very unique, like or, like, these not, it's, like, kind of shared humanity and, like, a similar upbringing that's still
Mhm.
unique.
Yeah.
Being able to, like, share my perspective, but also hear others' perspectives, has been super helpful because just, like, simply, like, seeing like, having someone, like, see and validate you, and it's like, "Oh, yeah, like, me too," is, like,
Yeah.
super, super powerful.
Yeah, that's really cool. I never thought about looking online for a community like that. So, do you mind me asking, like, how you went about finding that community?
There's, like, something on Facebook called Subtle Asian Traits, and it was kind of like a way for, like, Asian Americans to, like, gather and, kind of just, like, joke around about, like, what it was like to grow up Asian American, but then, like, they had a bunch of spin-off groups that, like, it's just grown in popularity to, like, I don't think, like, anyone expected it, like that, like, the admins of, like, that group expected, and some of the spin-offs are, like, Subtle Asian Mental Health, for example, and, like and it's like that's one of the more serious ones, and there are other things like just Subtle Asian, like, food.
That's really cool though. Yeah, that's a great idea. I wonder if everyone could just do like a Google search even for like
Yeah.
Facebook specific groups. So I think that's a great idea. Do you think that the stigmas will eventually improve within the Asian American communities?
I would love to say, like, yes. It's like, it will improve, but I'm not, like, entirely confident in that answer because it's like I think a lot of, like, Asian communities are stuck with, like, very traditional, like, methods towards, like, managing mental health, which is stuffing it down and, like, don't talk about it. And I think, like, a lot of Asian communities had to do that to, survive, and it was just, like, a necessity, and now it's like they don't necessarily see the need to change and seek better. It's kinda just like it's worked for me in the past, so, like, why not, like, continue it? And, like, not really seeing that there's, like, a different way of living, which, like, to be fair, is, like, something I didn't realize before I, like, went through my own, like, mental health treatment, like, stuff. So, I do have more hope for, like, the younger Asian American community who, like especially the ones that grew up in the US, and we just happen to have more, like we're being exposed to the concept of mental health more than, like, our parents, for example. And that being said, it's like, I know it's not, like, fully destigmatized in, like, this country either, but I think it is more discussed in gen
Yeah, I feel like even in the last couple of years, people have been a lot more open about mental health. So I'm hoping it kind of like trickles into all parts of our society eventually. And through generations, we'll see a change in that. So it's just a normal topic.
I was kinda, like, hesitant to, like, generalize it to, like, the Asian American community because I think I've noticed that it's more widespread than that. I just think I do have I do have a lot of hope for, like, the future generations.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you kind of cope and take care of yourself. And I want to talk about your interest in martial arts. So I'm curious, how did you first get involved in martial arts?
So, I first started doing boxing for fitness throughout high school. And then for my undergrad, I went to the University of Michigan, and I tried out and joined like the university's club boxing team. So, like for clarification, it's not like a NCAA recognized sport, but like the club sport status is like the highest for boxing, like on the collegiate level. Um, and then when I got to the University of Michigan and like tried out and made the team, that's when I started competing. Um, and being on that team was like a huge part of like my college experience. Like I was on the team like for all 4 years of undergrad. Um, my junior year, like my biggest accomplishment was winning a championship belt in like the collegiate boxing world. And then my senior year, I was the president of the team. And like, it's like if you told me that like when I was like before any time before like undergrad, I would have been like, no, like I could not have imagined that.
Mhm.
Um, and now that I've like moved to California after graduating, I've started to learn Muay Thai, which is like traditional Thai kickboxing and like the national sport of Thailand. So far I've competed once in a Muay Thai bout, and I'm looking forward to competing more in the future.
That's really cool. How did you first get into the sport? I mean, I know you mentioned like in high school, but was there anything that first drew you into it?
I like really don't think know like confidently why. It's like I know growing up, I kind of found like those video games with fighting like kind of entertaining, and like I know like my dad and I would kind of like play wrestle, so like that's like some form of like physical martial arts activity. I think it's like my parents were just kind of like throwing everything at a wall and seeing what would stick in terms of like finding like an activity I would enjoy to like maintain my like physical health. Because especially when I was more like in the quote unquote overweight like diagnosis, like based on like doctors like standards, which are messed up, but that's like a totally different that's a totally different conversation. But I think they just I think it was kind of just like, oh, like why not try boxing? Like it's different. Like let's see if this works. And it did. So it's like I don't even know why I first started until I tried it, but like I've stayed.
Yeah.
Which is
Oh, it's so cool. Yeah. And how do you think it helps your mental and physical health?
so in terms of physical health, it is a way of being active and doing something that I enjoy to be active, where it's like, yes, I am working out, but uh, it's not like the more disordered compulsion exercise that like I would associate with eating disorders a lot. Um, but in terms of mental health, I think like that is not like super evident from an outsider's perspective, but like one thing that martial arts has helped me with a lot is like mindfulness, um, especially like being focused on like one task at hand. And then also I've appreciated how it's let me be in like tune with my body and understand my body and its mechanics. So just like getting a greater appreciation for like what I'm doing. Um, and then another like super helpful part, like for mental health aspects, is like having a community that's like working towards a common goal and just having like teammates who are like super supportive, understand like how hard everything is, and are just there for me, you know?
Yeah, that's super great. Yeah, I'm glad you found that community. I think that's so important to have a support system, whether it's like friends, family, whatever it is. And I think it's so interesting too that I've talked to a couple other people on the podcast who are either like dancing or like you are into martial arts, and it's really interesting the connection. Like we always say, like, well, the kind of like cliche thing to say about your mental health is like to take care of yourself, like you should like be active. But it's also like I like how everyone has mentioned like it's a way for you to be in tune with your body and to kind of understand your whole body better. It's not just about like getting your heart rate up, like it's more than that, which is really interesting. How has having a mental illness changed you?
I think like a lot of days, including like yesterday, I was just like, why do I have to be the one with the mental illness? It's like, why do I have to be it's like just sitting with my thoughts. It's just like, I'm unhappy and like, I don't like that I'm unhappy, you know? And I know it's like in my mind, it's like, it's not fair, quote unquote, but like, I have to embrace the fact that like this mental illness is a part of me and it's like shaped me into who I am today. And like one of my Muay Thai coaches like reminds all of us, and especially me when I was going through some more difficult periods of my life where it's like all of life is about like facing adversity because adversity is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to like try and shift our perspectives to say, let's embrace the opportunity to face adversity, to grow from it and overcome it. So I think like in a sense, like we're all fighting in our own ways, in different ways. And having a mental illness has just made me appreciate like my desire to like fight that much more.
I think that's so awesome. I think everyone could probably relate to that on some level because we all face adversity in our life, big or small. So I think yeah, having a mental illness is just another thing that we kind of have to, like you said, embrace and kind of see the positives of it to get through.
And
So
it's also just kind of like accepting that it's like everyone has like a fight that they're fighting. It just
yeah,
looks different for everyone. And it's like
exactly.
just being open minded to like everyone's differing like reality and
Yeah,
journey.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, so thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm very grateful that you're so open and honest about your experience. And before we go, I just wanted to ask if there's anything you want to promote or share, or yeah, the floor is yours.
um, if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to talk more on my Instagram account is Hey Jay Zhang. I don't know if that was something that I should just type up or like just post somewhere in the end, but it's like hey how you doing, and then like the first initial of my first name and then my last name. So I'm happy to talk more with people about like my struggles, what I enjoy in life, any of the fun stuff, any of the hard stuff.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for offering that. And we'll put your handle in the show notes,
Okay, for sure.
so people can always just click on it and then they'll go right to your Instagram. So yeah, thank you again. It was great talking to you and meeting you, and I hope we can connect again in the future.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, all right, take care. The To Be Honest podcast is a creative platform that enables youth and young adults to share their personal experience with mental health to help normalize the conversation around this often taboo topic. To Be Honest is a program of Momentum for Health and is supported by District 4 Inventory Funds, Republic Urban Properties, and BetterHelp. To learn more about To Be Honest, visit tobehonest.today or check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The To Be Honest podcast is hosted and edited by Avery Cruz, as well as edited by Peyton Dillehay. Music for the podcast was created by Julia Steele. For more information, check out the episode show notes in the streaming platform of your choice. Happy listening!